Good evening. My name is Alicia Yokoyama, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's third Tuesday Author Series program in celebration of Disability Pride Month that is generously sponsored by the Friends of the Lake Oswego Public Library. The Friends of the Lake Oswego Public Library is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing enhanced support for library projects of community interest. We'd love for you to know more about the Friends and the great programs they support, such as the Summer Library Challenge, music and author events, monthly trivia nights, and the fabulous Lake Oswego Reads program. Visit the Friends website to learn more about their work, including the Booktique used bookstores and how you can join in supporting the library. Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's author, Syren Nagakyrie. Syren grew up with multiple disabilities and encounters numerous barriers to outdoor recreation, but has always found nature to be a place of belonging. As a longtime disabled activist and community builder, Syren is committed to an outdoors culture transformed by representation, accessibility, and justice for all, and all other marginalized outdoors people. They are the author of The Disabled Hiker's Guide to Western Washington and Oregon, Outdoor Adventures Accessible by Car, Wheelchair, and on Foot, published by FalconGuides. Please give a warm welcome to Syren Nagakyrie.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you to the library for hosting. Grew up in libraries. Really, they have a very special place in my heart, so I'm always excited to come in and do a presentation here. So again, my name is Syren Nagakyrie, and I'm the founder of Disabled Hikers. For accessibility purposes, I will kind of give a brief description of myself and the slides that are on the screen behind me. So I'm a white non-binary person with long brown hair. And behind me is a photo of two disabled folks on a trail with the Disabled Hikers logo. So we'll talk a little bit about, my background in the outdoors and what the outdoors means to me, how I wrote the guide, and a little bit about what access in the outdoors means, and what some of these more technical things that I had to learn to be able to write a book, and discuss some of that. So, about me, this is a photo of myself and my little dog, Benji, who is patiently waiting at home. So I am, again, I have multiple disabilities and chronic illnesses. I grew up with disabilities and have been disabled basically my entire life. And, I really felt, very excluded from my peers growing up, and really didn't feel like I had a place to belong. But for me, as a disabled and chronically ill person, as a queer and trans person, my identity is very much a part of who I am. And it is both something that defines me and also something that really influences the way that I move through the world and how I experience the world. And of course, identity is political, right? So how we exist in the world is very much defined by political influences and how people see us and the biases that they hold. So, coming up and as growing up with these disabilities and really feeling very excluded from my peers and from school was really a very, of course, defining part of my youth. But I always felt like nature was a place where I could belong. So I wasn't really outdoorsy growing up, right? Like we didn't go out on hikes, we didn't go camping, we didn't really do picnics or that kind of thing. That was just not what my family did. But I would spend a lot of time in my yard just hanging out and watching the birds and the bugs and watching the moon at night. I grew up in Florida and summers were way too hot to be outdoors, but I spent a lot of time in the evening just watching the birds and looking at the moon and things like that. And that really kind of helped me begin to have a sense of connection and, felt like I belonged somewhere, where when I went into school, I was bullied by my peers, didn't really feel like I had a place to belong. But I knew that whenever I was outdoors, I could kind of lean into that experience and really feel like I had a place that I could belong and connect to. So nature has always been a place of belonging for me and, leading into that experience, especially through periods of illness, injury, stress, trauma. When I didn't have that community that I could lean into nature. So that really helped kind of bolster me through these experiences. And on the screen here, there's a quote that says, "When I'm outside, I experience disability in the landscape." There's a variety of ways for bodies and beings to exist in nature. And when I'm outdoors, I can see that. I can notice that. I can experience that. Whether it's, different types of genetic differences, disability in the landscape, for example, in old growth forest, a lot of the trees that survived logging survived because they had imperfections, because they had things wrong with them that made them less valuable to the logging industry. But now, when we're out in nature, we seek out those differences, right? We seek out those things that make those trees unique and special, and that's awe-inspiring for us. So as I learned more about nature and what that meant in the natural world, for me, that really also gave me a way to connect and to see like, oh, disability is not wrong. There's imperfections are not unnatural. It is a perfectly natural and normal way to be embodied and to exist in the world. And especially as the climate crisis escalates and as the land becomes increasingly disabled through climate change, that is something that disabled bodies also experience. And so it's very much this reciprocal engagement, right? So as the land becomes increasingly disabled, and then those effects of climate change affect disabled bodies too. And then we can see that interchange. So, there's a lot to learn not only from nature, but from disabled folks. We have a lot of wisdom to share about ways of being embodied in the world and how to navigate the world through different ways of understanding and being. So on the photo behind me here, there's a quote that says, "You can stay behind." And as I mentioned, growing up, I really felt very excluded from my peers. I wasn't able to participate in things like physical education. I tried Girl Scouts for a little while. That did not go well. And I felt really just very excluded. So, but I wanted to learn more about the natural environment and how to engage and how to have these experiences. So I enrolled in some natural science education courses in community college, and that gave me an opportunity to go out and start learning more about the natural world and go out on these field trips. And in, I guess, my second year or so of that program, we had the opportunity to go out and visit the Grand Canyon. And this was my first time leaving the state of Florida. It was my first time going out west and having, seeing this different kind of landscape. And I was really excited to go out and experience this. But at the time, I didn't really have a lot of language to describe my needs and my experience and what I was comfortable with and not comfortable with. I was still learning that and figuring it out for myself. So we had this one experience here. The photo, you see, it's looking down into a cave and there's some people climbing down. So we were out and the group was really excited to go out and explore this cave. And I was looking there, kind of looking around like, there is no way I'm going to be able to do this. It was kind of snowy, it was icy, lots of rocks, really steep. I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this. So I said to my professor, I can't do this. I'm not comfortable with doing this. And they said, okay, well, you can just stay behind. Just hang out up here by yourself. And I was like, okay, all right. So, I'm sitting there by myself, watching everyone go down into this cave and hearing the excitement and all that. And, again, feeling very excluded and left out by that. But at the same time, I'm sitting there by myself in the middle of the desert, looking around and just kind of going, wow, this is really, I had a moment by myself to just really appreciate that experience. While the rest of my peers were carrying on and being loud and having a good time, I'm sitting up there and just really, taking in the landscape around me. And for me, that kind of was also a moment where I was able to kind of just switch my perspective, right? So I realized that I didn't always have to go and have these loud, grand experiences. I could just, spend time out in nature and have a really meaningful experience for me. And later I, spoke with some of my classmates about that experience, and they didn't really remember much about it. They didn't really have anything to say about it. But, for me, it was a moment that really has stuck with me for decades. So after that, I, again, wanted to really continue learning about the natural world and how to have more of these experiences. So I moved to Western North Carolina, which is one of the places that I very much consider a heart home, and I enrolled in an herbal education program and spent 2 years really learning, about plants and ecology and wildcrafting and medicinal and edible plants and all of that. And it was, for me, really kind of the first time I was able to be with a group of people and have kind of these slower experiences in the outdoors. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to go on a plant outing, but it is often a very slow experience, a very mindful experience, a lot of oohing and awing over this one tiny little plant. And it was really, really meaningful for me. And, so I continued really kind of leaning into those early experiences of just, being more mindful in nature and, really appreciating the experiences that I could have and learning about the landscape that was around me and what that meant and how I interacted with it. And it really kind of reframed the outdoors for me. So it, from there I kind of realized like, oh, like hiking is a thing that people do, right? Like if we're going out on plant walks and, I learned more about hiking and things like that. And, so I wanted to figure out really what that meant for me. If I wanted to have more of these experiences, then hiking would be a way to do it. So how do I do that? What does that mean for me and my body and my needs? So I really had to kind of figure a lot of that out on my own. So fast forward to 2018, I had moved up to the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State, which is where I currently live now. And it is a stunning landscape. If you've never been there, it's really incredible. It's old growth rainforest and rocky coastline and mountains. It's really incredible. And I was so excited to go out and experience this new place I was in and learn about the landscape and the plants and the animals. So I started doing tons of research about the local trails, trying to figure out where I could go, what would be accessible for me, what I could manage, what kind of information was out there. And every time I do a hike, I spend hours researching ahead of time, right? So one day I started out on kind of a segment of a trail system that I'd done other portions before, but not this particular segment. And, I did all my research ahead of time, thought it was going to be very easy and accessible for me, no problem. Immediately I get there and I encounter steep stairs and rocky drop-offs and rocky cliffs and, steep sections and all this stuff that wasn't listed in any of the guides that I read anywhere, wasn't in any of the information. And it really put me in a, honestly, very dangerous and frustrating position, So I was, at that point, like I couldn't turn back, right? Like it was going to be just as difficult if I turned back, if I continued on. So I kept going. I was getting increasingly frustrated and in pain and sad, and finally wound up at this bridge over a waterfall and was just leaning against it and, just again, feeling really in a lot of pain, a lot of frustration, really sad, and just saying, I cannot believe this has happened again. So in that moment, kind of inspiration struck, and I said, I'm going to do something about this. And I went home and wrote up a little blog post about it and put up a trail guide and, launched it as Disabled Hikers. And, really, before I knew it, it was really taking off in some really incredible and unexpected ways. And yeah, that moment is, will also always kind of stick in my mind as one of those pivotal moments that I've had out in nature by just taking a moment to be in the experience and breathe and, just feel what I was feeling in that moment rather than just constantly trying to push on. Because that is something that I feel like is very prevalent in outdoor culture. It's always about conquering the trail and getting in as many miles as fast as you can and like getting to whatever your destination is. And sure, that's one way to experience nature, but it's not my preferred way. And I think that by shifting some of those perceptions, we can really shift not only our relationship with nature and the land, but our understanding of our bodies and what we need. So this quote here says, "There is no one right way for water to flow, and there is no one right way for my body to be either." I think, nature really resists binaries. It resists any kind of like either or definition. That was another thing that kind of struck me in that moment as I was watching this waterfall and just noticing the variety of ways that like water was flowing over this rock and pooling in this little pool and, going this way and that there was really no right or wrong to it. It just was. And, that was, how I feel about my body too. It's my experiences and how I move through the world can change from day to day. And it's not right or wrong. It's just what my body is and what I need. So Disabled Hikers is we are now a 501c3 nonprofit, and we, looking at my notes because brain fog. Our mission is to build disability, community, and justice in the outdoors towards a vision of an outdoors culture transformed by access, representation, and justice for disabled and all other marginalized people. And we do a lot of different things in that landscape, really to try to help shift the needle to make the outdoors much more accessible, to really shift perceptions about disability in the outdoors, and to really challenge ableism that is so dominant in our culture in general, but especially in the outdoor space. So we do the trail guides, and we also do a lot of group hikes that are really, we are entirely disabled led, and our group hikes are affinity spaces. So they are for disabled and chronically ill people only, and their friends and family and caregivers. So it's really a very safe space to come in and just figure out what being in the outdoors means for you, and to have that community that will really understand what it means to be disabled and what your access needs are. And then we also do a lot of consulting work and things like that with parks and organizations to try to improve accessibility and provide more resources and really encourage the creation of more accessible trails and providing more adaptive equipment and providing more information and things like that. So here we have 2 photos from group hikes, and they feature a diversity of disabled folks in outdoor spaces. And really, we are very much a community. As I mentioned, we are entirely disabled led, and that is very important to us. To be really grounded in the community, and really to uplift the community and all of the wisdom and the experience that disabled folks have, because we do have a lot to offer. And just from the ways that we have had to learn to navigate an inaccessible world, that has for a lot of folks really instilled a lot of wisdom and experience that we can share and offer with people. So, and we are very much about, again, creating disabled leadership in the outdoor space, and really offering those training and those resources to be able to develop more disabled leadership, so that we can really support a movement in the outdoor space of disabled folks, really advocating for ourselves and with each other. All right, the book. So this is the Disabled Hiker's Guide to Western Washington and Oregon. It really is, I feel like a very important book. It's the first one that I know of that is written entirely, not only, by a disabled person, and that addresses a variety of access needs and disability experiences in the outdoor space, by really trying to provide, full objective information as much as possible. So people often ask me, like, how did this come to be? Like, how did you go from like writing a blog post to writing a book? And I say, well, I don't really know, to be honest. It just kind of happened. But you know, kind of what inspired it was there was an article about me and disabled hikers in Outside magazine and I mentioned in there that I was writing trail guides and I'd love to write a book one day. I've always been a writer. But never imagined that this would be the book that I would write. And you know, I guess someone at Falcon saw that article and reached out and said, we would love to work with you on that. And I was like, wow, okay. I said someday, not like right now, but all right, cool, let's do it. So you know, we right away got into, you know, of course there's contracts and all that stuff. And then once we worked all that out, you know, I was trying to figure out what this book was going to be. You know, I didn't really have anything, you know, to really base it on, right? So there was very much a very long process of trying to figure out how to do this, what kind of information needed to be in it, what kind of trails needed to be in it. On this slide here is a photo. It's a screenshot of one of the Google Maps that I use with like different color-coded icons. This is kind of a glimpse into my neurodivergent brain. It's like color coding, icons, yes, let me see it so I can make sense. So it was really very much a 2-year process of really diving into, you know, the kind of information that was out there already or the information that was not out there already. And it really kind of became really a deep dive into the lack of access. You know, as I mentioned, I've always have dealt with this for my entire life, but really kind of dedicating 2 years to really diving into this was very much an eye-opener even for me. And, you know, it was really, you know, kind of a internship in accessibility, if you will. And, you know, so it took 2 years of research, of planning, of hiking. And of course, this was, I started it in January of 2020. And then, you know, 2 months later, we all know what happened. And, you know, COVID kind of shifted everything and really made it increasingly difficult to try to write a hiking guide in the midst of dealing with, you know, COVID and travel restrictions and my own health and safety and all of that. So, you know, I was still living in Olympic Peninsula at the time, and so I had to do a lot of traveling up and down throughout Western Washington and Western Oregon, and you know, I hiked every single trail that is in the book, plus some. So here's a photo of me pointing at a trail map sign, and you know, this whole process was really creating the thing that I needed to exist to be able to create the thing, you know. So it was a lot of really diving into accessibility guidelines, figuring out how people, you know, currently describe trails and what is out there, what people need, what information is lacking. And, you know, it was really challenging to try to, you know, realize that there was so much bad information out there, you know, or just incomplete information. You know, everything that exists out there predominantly is written by non-disabled people, and it assumes that people who hike are not disabled. So, you know, of course, they don't necessarily think about the same things that a disabled person needs to think about when they're trying to find a trail. So, you know, it was very much trying to, again, create the thing that I need to exist so that I can continue creating the thing. And that has been very much, you know, the experience of disabled hikers on the whole, and really trying to, you know, bring community together and figure out what we all need and what is lacking and how we can address it. So a few examples here of the kind of information that, you know, you may be familiar with when you're looking at trail guides and things like that. So here is a photo of McDowell Creek Falls, which is a very popular park. And it is frequently described as, you know, a very easy trail, anyone can do it, no problem. But, you know, what they forget to mention is that there's still 300 feet of elevation change and something like 250 stairs to get to these waterfalls. And they're very steep. They're like some really slippery wooden stairs, some really uneven stone steps. So none of that is going to be easy for people who have mobility issues, you know, pulmonary issues, balance issues, you know, depth perception. Any of that is going to be really challenging to navigate that kind of landscape. So, you know, every trail guide I read about this trail is like, oh, it's so beautiful, it's easy, you know, yeah, there's some stairs, but no big deal. And I got out there and literally boot scooted down, down the stairs so that I could get to these waterfalls. And here's another one. That's a photo of Drift Creek Falls. When you read about this trail, it's also a very popular one closer to the coast. And it has a suspension bridge, a very long suspension bridge high above the gorge. And people often only mention it as, you know, a really cool trail, and they note like the novelty of this bridge and how neat it is. And maybe they mention that it sways a little bit, you know, but they don't mention that actually it sways a lot. And if you have balance issues or vertigo or fear of heights, like that is really challenging. And then they don't mention anything else about the trail in general. So, you know, there's also has like steep sections and really muddy areas and flooding and things like that that are big considerations for folks who have disabilities. So a little bit more about the kind of trail information that is included in this book and what makes it unique. So here's a photo of the book and some stickers and things like that. So one of the things that I created was the spoon rating. And this is based on an understanding of spoon theory by Christine Miserandino, which is very much connected with, you know, parts of disability culture and chronic illness culture. And it is, the spoons are a representation of the amount of energy that a lot of chronically ill and disabled folks have in a day and how they have to ration that. So, you know, you may start the day with 10 spoons, and every activity you do takes a certain number of spoons. And once those spoons are gone, you are done. And, you know, you will need to like rest and recuperate and hopefully regain some spoons, but that doesn't always happen. And it doesn't always happen on a guaranteed timeline. And that's kind of what we also refer to as crip time. So this understanding that, you know, our bodies have limitations and we need to rest and rejuvenate, and that can look different from person to person and day to day. So spoon theory is, you know, again, a way of understanding the amount of energy that we have in a day and how to ration that. So I wanted to use something that, you know, was relatable to our communities and disability culture, and that, you know, people could relate to, and also to offer some kind of more objective, quote unquote, difficulty rating than what is out there. So, you know, often trails will be described as easy, medium, hard, but they don't say what that means, right? Like easy for who, hard for who, what does that actually mean? So trying to offer a more objective way to really rate the difficulty or accessibility of a trail and try to, you know, be very detailed about that. So a little awkward to read this way. Let's see. So we have one spoon. I'll kind of go over this real quick. 0 to 2 miles, level and even with grades under 8%, paved, very easy to navigate, probably wheelchair accessible. So one of the things that I also did was really try to expand the understanding of what wheelchair accessibility means. So, you know, I think a lot of people think about wheelchair accessibility only in terms of paved trails. And that is absolutely very important for a lot of folks who use wheelchairs. You know, you need a firm, paved, flat trail to be able to navigate that. But it is not the only way that people who use wheelchairs are able to navigate an outdoor space. And there's a broad variety of adaptive equipment that is out there that allows people to navigate more difficult terrain. So trying to pull that into this rating system to, provide a way to think about that and, to provide more of that information. So of course, the full descriptions go into more detail about that, but this is just one way to kind of start looking like, okay, maybe this trail will work for me, maybe it won't. And, again, the rating system kind of goes up, depending on mileage and grade and surface and obstacles and things like that. And within this system, like any one factor within like the individual spoon rating can change, and it may not necessarily change the overall spoon rating because, again, accessibility varies so widely. And every disabled person's needs are different, and they may differ from day to day. So it's not a matter of me telling you, yes, this will be accessible for you, or it will not be. It's here's the information that you need to give you a starting point to be able to decide for yourself if it's going to be accessible or not. So here's a couple of my favorite trails here in Oregon and kind of how I described them. So Old Growth Cedar Preserve, this is out at Rockaway Beach. Has anyone been here? It's really a special place. It was fairly recently protected, if I remember correctly, and they put in a boardwalk to protect the wetlands and to protect the tree. But so often when you improve accessibility, it not only protects the landscape, but it makes it more accessible for people. So now there's this wonderful boardwalk that goes through wetlands and then circles this incredible, huge old growth cedar that I believe is the only one left remaining on the coast, or at least in that portion of the coast. It's a really special place. So I rated it as a 1 spoon and then said, yes, it is wheelchair accessible for the boardwalk portion. But there is also a natural surface dirt footpath that leads off from the boardwalk and kind of creates a loop. So of course that's going to be a different kind of accessibility, right? So you have to include that. So I said if you do that portion, that's going to be a 2 spoon, and this is going to be, and then go into detail about that surface and things like that. Then Applegate, East Applegate Ridge Trail. This is down in southern Oregon, near Jacksonville. And I love this trail because it's a hike along a ridge line, but the road does the work for you. So you drive up to the ridge line, and then the trail itself is generally pretty level. There's a few short, steep sections, but generally it's about a 3% average grade. And it goes right along the ridge line, incredible views. And that is an experience that a lot of disabled folks don't necessarily get to have because ridgeline trails are often by their nature just really inaccessible, and there's not a whole lot you can do about that in most cases. But this one was really easy for me, was pretty accessible, but there were definitely some components in there, right? So I'd be sure to, in the description, I point out that it is a multi-use trail. So you're going to have people hiking on foot, you're going to have people riding a bike, and you may even have horses. And it is, a fairly narrow trail with some steep drop-offs. So that is, not going to be accessible for a lot of folks. So, that is definitely one thing to keep in mind. And also, there's no benches. There's one bench, I think, along the entire trail, and it's almost at the end. So, factors like that are definitely really important to consider. And then this is one in Washington that I also really enjoy. It's another boardwalk trail. It's right off of Highway 20 in North Cascades. And, it's a really nice boardwalk that goes along Happy Creek. There's some big trees and nice bubbling creek, lots of benches, nice overlooks, places to hang out. And because it is, just a boardwalk trail, it doesn't get very busy because a lot of people overlook it, right? They think, oh, that's not really worth my time. But I loved it. It's a really nice trail. So I want to go a little bit into the specifics of the information that is provided because, again, for me, I had to figure out a lot of this on my own, right? Like there was no one to explain it to me. There was no one to put it into words that I could understand. So I really had to figure it out as a matter of trial and error, to be honest, and looking at what was out there. So there's trail types, right? And in this book, there's mostly two. So there's an out and back. That means you're going out and then turning around and coming back the same way. And there's loops. You can also combine an out and back and a loop, which is called a lollipop loop. And that means you go out and then you kind of do a loop and then come back on the same trail. And then the distance, giving the entire length of the trail from start to finish, and being very clear about what that means, because oftentimes people will only give you, if it's an out and back, they'll give you one way and not be very clear that that's one way. So, but there's also a lot of deviation in distances and trails, depending on what you're looking at and how that was calculated. So, I often tell people kind of, if you're doing a lot of research, kind of take an average of all the information that is out there to get an idea. And then when I give the elevation gain, you also ideally want to give the elevation loss, right? Because for some folks, doing a gain is going to be more difficult than a loss and vice versa. So being very clear about what that is. Unfortunately, in this book, I wasn't able to consistently do elevation loss, so I left it out of all the trails. But that is another important factor. And then the max grade. So the grade is the steepness of a trail, basically. And I often tell people that, so your average wheelchair ramp, for example, will be a 2 to 5% grade, maximum 8% grade, with some level areas and things like that. So that's kind of one way to conceptualize a grade, right? So if you're looking at a 10% grade, that's going to be twice as steep as your average wheelchair ramp. A lot of places will give you the grade over a long length of trail, right? So the quarter mile. But for me, even 5 feet of a steep trail can make it inaccessible. So that's why I really tried to bring it down into as short of a distance as possible for the maximum grade, so that even for these 5 feet, that this is how steep it's going to be. Unfortunately, it's really difficult to accurately record grades unless you have some very expensive computer equipment. So when I was doing it, I was going around with a handheld inclometer that you put down on the trail, and it takes a measurement. So I would often take a couple of measurements and kind of average it out. And then the cross slope is the same kind of thing, but on the horizontal axis, right? So that's from the inside to the outside of the trail. And a steep cross slope is really anything over 2%. Some people can navigate a 5%, but that's going to be really difficult for some wheelchair users, depending on the type of wheelchair you're using, people who have a difference in limb length, people who have unsteady balance or gait. A steep cross slope can actually be much more inaccessible than a steep grade. So, and that information is very often left out. So that's really important to consider if you're providing information. And then the width of a trail, making sure it's going to be wide enough for the variety of adaptive equipment that is out there. So, a typical wheelchair, you want a minimum of 3 feet wide, but there are a lot of adaptive equipment that need much wider, especially if, it's a mountain biking trail and you're using an adaptive mountain bike. So being, very clear about what that width is, so that people can make that decision. And then the surface of the trail, it's also often called the tread. So that is kind of what the trail is made out of. So is it gravel? What kind of gravel? Is it the really small pea gravel, or is it the large road aggregate? Because that is a very different experience depending on how you're walking, what equipment you're using. Is it natural, soil, rocks, things like that? And then again, talking about trail users, like I said before, are you sharing the trail with mountain bikers who are going to be rushing down the trail at you, and are you going to be able to get out of the way in enough time? Who can you expect to encounter on that trail so that you can make that decision? Water is also something that is often left out. A lot of, hardcore hikers are like, well, as long as there's surface water, I can filter it and I'll be good. Well, I can't get down to a creek or a river or a lake to filter my water. So knowing whether there's going to be water fountains available, where they are, where that surface water is and how to get down to it, if there's going to be easy places to do that, and identify where that is. And then amenities like benches and restrooms and, nice places to sit and hang out, and take a break, and visitor centers, things like that, where I know that I'll be able to take a break, be able to ask for help if I need it, find information if I need it, all of that. And then dog friendly, I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize that even on non-dog friendly trails, service dogs are always allowed. Service dogs are permitted everywhere that their handler goes, and that includes trails. So even national parks that don't allow pets, service dogs are allowed. But maybe if you have a service dog, you want to know if that is a dog friendly trail or not, so you know if you're going to encounter people's pets. And then being really clear about how to find the trailhead. So once I get to that parking lot, where is the trailhead? Like, how do I find it? That can be really confusing for a lot of folks, especially if, you have difficulty processing that kind of information or spatial awareness, things like that. So having really clear understanding of how to find that trailhead and how to get to it, so that you're not like looking lost in a parking lot, because, no one wants that. And then doing really detailed trail description. So in this book and in our guides, it's very like step-by-step, roll by roll, like down to less than a 1/10 of a mile. Like, what are you going to encounter along the way? Don't assume that, people may or may not care about a certain factor, because you may not know. So really just being as detailed as possible so that people have all the information that they need to be able to make their own informed decision. Because it's really about providing that information so that disabled folks have the autonomy to make that decision for themselves. We don't necessarily need someone telling us, yes, it's accessible, no, it's not. I know what is accessible to me more than you do. So just give me the information so that I can make that decision. And then elevation profiles are something that used to be in a lot of guidebooks and aren't as much anymore. I was very adamant that they need to be in these books because they're really helpful. But a lot of people don't necessarily know how to read them. So an elevation profile is kind of that line, like that graph line that shows you the elevation on a trail. But it's not like an exact replica of the steepness of a trail, right? So I tell people to kind of look at it like a graph. So at like 1/10 of a mile, you're going to be at this elevation. At a 1/2 a mile, you're going to be at this elevation. But on a longer trail, that's going to look less steep than it will on a shorter trail, just because that's the nature of graphs. So to kind of think of it more in that way. So again, my hope for this book and for everyone is that it really helps you get out there, because I very much believe that we all belong in nature and that we all have a right to these experiences in the outdoors, and that's my hope, and to also help change the way that we think about trails and accessibility and how we provide information and how we talk to folks about the outdoors. So thank you. Here's disabledhikers.com. You're welcome to reach out through there. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at Disabled Hikers. You're welcome to follow us. I will also say that on Saturday, we are going to be at Lower Maclay Park in Forest Park. Portland Parks and Rec is doing a adaptive hiking expo in celebration of Disability Pride Month. So there will be several organizations and adaptive equipment folks, and we'll be doing an infinity space and a group hike. So that's 9 a.m. at Lower Maclay Park. Yep. And they're doing transportation and things like that too, so you can register, and yeah. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you. If anyone has questions, I have a microphone for you to use, so just let me know.
Thank you. My name is Sharon. Could you talk a little bit about fear, the kind of overcoming fear, the fear of what could happen? What if I get out there and I run out of spoons at the apex of the hike, or what if I fall and I'm alone? Those, getting over those fears in preparation to get out and hike.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I will say still haven't gotten over that fear. That fear will always be with me. But I do it anyway, you know, because the value of doing it is worth it for me. But, you know, I completely understand that fear for sure. Like every time I go out on a hike, I know I am risking pretty serious injury, even on just a quote unquote easy trail, just by the nature of it. So, you know, I do things like, you know, make sure I tell people where I'm going and, you know, have a emergency beacon or emergency thing on my phone. You know, make sure that you know, I'll bring like a collapsible chair with me so that I can take a break if I need to, and there's like no benches or even a nice log anywhere to sit on. And, you know, make sure I have, you know, like a water bladder full of water so that I have enough water with me, and snacks and all of that. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
In one of your earlier slides, I really enjoyed your description of various things. You had several different symbols. Could you talk a little bit about them and what the legend is for those? I can understand there was one that was wheelchair and one that looked like full hiking. There was a yellow one and a green one. I couldn't quite figure out what those were.
Yeah, that's my brain. So basically I used kind of those different colored icons to kind of picture how, as I was developing the book, kind of the variety of like difficulty of trails, right? So there was like wheelchair accessible trails, and then using kind of a green, yellow, orange, red to kind of indicate the rating on the spoon rating system, so that I had a good visualization of, you know, kind of the variety of difficulty, the variety of trails, and the locations all in kind of one spot.
So green was good and red was intense, or?
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah, yep.
Syren, thank you so much for writing this. I can't wait to get a copy.
Yeah.
It's so useful for everybody. I'm hoping that your system will be adopted more widely. Because yeah, when I look at a lot of, you know, even the ones I have for, you know, families, you know, it's not that helpful. You don't get a whole lot of information. You're not sure if you're going to come upon a steep cliff, you know, with a little child, which is very scary. Yeah. So has there been talk about your system being adopted more broadly?
Yeah, we have a lot of interest from folks who are interested in the system and implementing it, and, you know, at least being more intentional about the kind of accessibility information that is provided. You know, I will say that there's definitely a need for training and education to how to really assess these trails and the kind of information that you need to gather. It's a very intensive process. You know, every trail that I hiked, you know, if it, you know, would typically take me 2 hours, it maybe took me like 4 or 5, you know, so it's a very intensive process. There's a lot of information to gather. And, you know, if you're not really familiar with it, there's a lot that is easy to miss. So, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, then thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming this evening, and thank you to our audience as well. Have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you.